So anybody who knows me knows that I am a total history geek, especially a history geek for Unitarian Universalist history. This morning, we share a story that is important to Unitarian Universalists all over the world. This true story is imprinted in my own heart. This story informs my vision of Unitarian Universalism, the vision of Unitarian Universalism I want us to be able to embody and then pass on to future generations who will inherit our message of liberating love. The history we tell today is a story about pluralism. Pluralism celebrates that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. Pluralism invites us to embrace our differences and our commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. Our story is the story of a community that, during a time of increasing tension, polarization, and hate, these people came together to remember their humanity. This is the story of the Unitarian Universalist Flower Communion. Now, some of you just heard the word communion and went, oh, that's a religious word that I left behind. Just know, communion is a good word. It just means sharing. So this is a story about sharing. Norbert Čapek was born in 1870 in the country that we now call the Czech Republic, but at the time was called Bohemia. Norbert Čapek's family was too poor to send him to school, so they sent Norbert to live with his uncle Victor in Vienna, Austria. Norbert's uncle was a tailor, and Norbert worked as his assistant. This way, he was able to earn his own money to pay for school. Now, little Norbert liked school. He liked to learn. In school, he studied science, psychology, and philosophy, and he asked many questions about religion. Too many questions. Questions that challenged the religious faith in which he was being raised. Norbert asked, why does one person get to be in charge of the whole church and speak as the voice of God? Why are men only allowed to be priests? Why are only the men in charge? Why can't I find a church that celebrates our differences instead of trying to make us all seem the same? Norbert's uncle did not like that his nephew asked questions. He felt that was dangerous. He said, if you want to make it in the world, then you better keep your mouth shut and your mind closed. In some ways, the time and place in which Norbert lived wasn't all that different from the one we see unfolding now in our own country. Some people don't like it if you ask questions. Some don't like it if we choose ways that are different from their own. Far too many are being taught to feel threatened by differences. When Norbert grew into an adult, he still hadn't quite figured out how he could be spiritual in a way that felt authentic to him. Then, one day, while reading newspapers in the library, he noticed a woman who was also reading newspapers. Somehow, he knew he needed to meet her. He took a chance and introduced himself. Hi, I'm Norbert Čapek. The woman responded, hi, Norbert. It is good to meet you. I'm Maya Veronica Octavek. As they talked together there in the library, They realized that they shared a similar interest in developing themselves intellectually and spiritually. They were both on their individual search for truth and meaning. Could this be a search that they could share together? Norbert decided to take another risk and share his own spiritual struggles with Maya, not being sure how she would respond. Maya replied, "Norbert, it isn't as complicated as you are making it. I think you are a Unitarian." Norbert responded, "What's a Unitarian?" Maya smiled and said, "Unitarians put the practice of love at the center of their faith. They believe that all life is interconnected and interdependent, which means that Unitarians prioritize the most vulnerable among us. They affirm the inherent dignity and the inherent worthiness of all people. They respect diversity and difference and see that as a spiritual strength. Unitarians teach that we need not think alike to love alike." Could we say that together? We need not think alike to love alike. Norbert's response was succinct. If that's what it means to be a Unitarian, sign me up. So our story continues. You probably guessed that Norbert and Maya fell madly in love and got married. Soon after, Norbert and Maya decided to become Unitarian ministers. They went to seminary, and several years later, they were ordained. Maya and Norbert were now officially Reverend Maya and Reverend Norbert. Now just think, at that time, just over 100 years ago, there were very few female Unitarian ministers. There were very few female ministers of any kind of religion. Maya, our Maya, was a trailblazer and a pioneer. She helped break a glass ceiling in a faith tradition, this faith tradition that now, 101 years later, has more female ministers than male ministers. So here we have Maya, here we have Norbert, and it is 1921. We're in the city of Prague in what is now called the Czech Republic. Maya and Norbert start their own Unitarian church. People from many different religious backgrounds came to that church. They came because they wanted to be part of a church that taught values that resonated with them. They wanted to be part of a spiritual community because they didn't want to face the complexities of life and the uncertainty of the world all by themselves. They wanted companions for the journey, companions who cared about shaping a more loving, more compassionate world. Now remember, this was 3 years after the end of World War I. The death and destruction of that so-called war to end all wars was still all around them. In the aftermath of war, Maya and Norbert wanted to do something that could bring people together and then remind them that even in the most brutal and soul-crushing of times, there was still beauty. There was still hope in the world. They wanted to create a ritual that was open to everybody, no matter their religious background or their spiritual beliefs. One May morning, Maya just happened to look out the church office window, and she noticed the flowers that were growing in the garden. Maya said to Norbert, "These flowers remind me of beauty. Maybe our new ritual could be based on them." Maya continued in words summarized by Fred Small. "In the ugliness of oppression, Flowers celebrate the eternal hope of freedom. In the face of cruelty, they speak of courage and hope. In the meadow, they speak of freedom, creating patterns wild and breathtaking. In their indescribable beauty, they remind us that we live always in the face of ineffable mystery. In their reappearance each year, flowers remind us that despite every hardship, life goes on. And so, together, that morning, they plan and create the flower communion. They asked everyone to bring a flower with them to church, and as they arrived, everybody placed their flowers in a vase. Placing the flowers in the vase represented that each person came into the church by their own free will. Nobody was forced to come. Well, except for some of the kids who had no choice. But that children then carried that vase to the front of the church, and the congregation, not the ministers, the congregation, the people, blessed the flowers together. After the service, as people prepared to leave, they went to that vase and took a flower home with them, different from the one that they had brought with them when they arrived. And don't worry, some of those people at that first communion forgot to bring flowers, didn't know they were supposed to bring flowers. There were enough extras for everybody. Now, I know at least one of us is asking, flowers are pretty, what does this flower communion actually symbolize? Think about it. No two flowers are the same. Together, the many different flowers form a beautiful bouquet. This bouquet would not be the same without each individual flower. So it is with us. Our church wouldn't be the same without each and every one of us. No matter how different we may be, we are all beautiful in God's eyes. For we are all part of the great bouquet of creation. We are, in the end, beautiful, different, and one. Maya and Norbert introduced the flower communion 101 years ago, which I might point out is exactly how old church member Sam Zutler is. He was born the same year as the flower communion. June 4th, 1923 was the first flower communion. The people in Maya and Norbert's church liked the flower communion and the caring community that it represented. Their church in Prague became the largest Unitarian church in the world with over 3,000 members. That meant a lot of flowers for their flower communion. That's also why they didn't come up during the ceremony and pick their flower then, because that would have been a long, long ceremony. But something really horrible happened that threatened this beautiful, simple ceremony. Adolf Hitler and the Nazis took control of Prague and Bohemia. Immediately, Maya and Norbert's church was labeled dangerous by the fascists. The Nazis did not want a church like the Chopiks. They did not want Maya and Norbert preaching the Unitarian message that all people are beautiful in God's eyes. They did not want people to embrace differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. Suddenly, Maya, Norbert, and the congregation found themselves in uncharted and uncertain times. They were frightened. They didn't know what was going to happen next. Was fascism going to be their future? Was fascism going to be their future? A question we are asking ourselves in this time. Many Unitarians in the congregation were threatened or beaten or taken from their homes and put in prison. Some Unitarians had the windows in their houses broken. Some businesses were robbed, shut down, or burned by the Nazis. Others worried if they would be the next to just disappear. The Chopeks themselves were regularly questioned by the Gestapo, who were very clear. Maya and Norbert were not to criticize Adolf Hitler. They were not to criticize anything at all about the Nazis. In public, Maya and Norbert remained silent. Remember that picture, the tape over their mouths? That was them. But they and members of the congregation formed a resistance team that met secretly at the church, and they helped Jews and other people escape from Prague. But finally, this fascist state became too much. Maya and Norbert couldn't take it anymore. In the spring of 1941, Norbert declared, "We must speak the truth and not be cowards." That Sunday, during his sermon, Norbert directly contradicted a hateful speech given earlier in the week by Adolf Hitler. Norbert excoriated Hitler for his lies and his cruel inhumanity. 5 days later, the Gestapo came to their home and arrested Norbert. Because of his sermon, the Nazis said it was, quote, "too dangerous for Norbert Chopek to be allowed to live," end of quote. Norbert was sent to Dachau, the concentration camp. On his papers were stamped these instructions, quote, "Chopek's return is unwanted." While in Dachau, Norbert introduced the prisoners in that concentration camp to the Unitarian flower communion. Each prisoner brought what flowers they could find in the concentration camp to a special service. At the end of the service, the prisoners left with a flower that was different than the one they had brought. The prisoners were inspired by the inclusive Unitarian flower communion that was open to anybody, no matter their religion. They liked that simple ritual reminded them that there was still beauty and goodness in the world. And at this time, I'm gonna ask for one of our ushers to run and let the kids know that we're nearing the end. And Betty, not you, since we're going to need you to be part of this in a few minutes. After the war, the survivors in Dachau testified that the Unitarian minister could not have been sent to a place that was more needed. Norbert brought hope and resilience to the Jewish, Christian, Unitarian, lesbian, gay, transgender, and Roma prisoners in Dachau. Norbert's ministry in Dachau ended when he was transported with other older prisoners to the section of the camp where barbaric medical experiments were being conducted on elderly prisoners. This gentle, strong man of love was tortured to death. These are the last words that Norbert wrote to his beloved wife and partner in ministry. He wrote to Maya, "The goal of religion is to create strong, confident, active, creative, loving persons who are happy with themselves, with nature, humanity, and the spirit of life." Back in Prague, it became too dangerous for Maya to remain in her city. She fled to the United States as an immigrant and refugee. And because It was different times then. She was welcomed as an immigrant and a refugee. And I will point out that she was welcomed because she was a European immigrant and refugee. Maya brought with her that flower communion from Prague. She first introduced it to the Unitarian Church in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but soon Maya began to travel and share that flower communion ritual in Unitarian congregations across the country. Maya shared that flower communion because she believed that the hardest times and the most dire moments are not strong enough to rob us of our capacity to share love. Not even death can take from us the love that is exchanged between people. It is with us as long as we have love to offer. It is with us whenever we are open to receiving love from others, by offering what we can, by making room to receive the offerings of others. We carry with us hope for our future. Que así sea, bendito sea. May it be so. Blessed be. Amen.